I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I am your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you episode number 81. In this podcast, dedicated to the continuous improvement of your own brain by any and all means at your disposal, which it turns out are a lot. There's a lot of means at your disposal. This week, we're going to be talking about one that is available to everybody, and that is sleep. This is our second sleep episode. We did one a long time ago, but I apparently didn't learn my lesson because I've been kind of jonesing for another sleep episode for quite some time. And we're going to be talking with a doctor who specializes in sleep, maximizing both sleep's effectiveness and oftentimes just the pure number of hours of sleep. He's a big proponent of getting more of the stuff. That is Dr. Kirk Parsley. He is an ex-Navy SEAL and performance athlete, and is somebody who works with high performers that are looking to push their bodies to the limit, and is himself a huge believer in the power of good old-fashioned sleep to make that a possibility. That is going to be in the main interview. If you hang around until the very end of this episode, I'm going to tell you the strange truth about how loud noises can make you fatter. Yeah, more pounds around the waist because of loud noise. Strange but apparently true. That is in the Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick. But to kick things off, like usual, let's start off with This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts. This Week in Neuroscience.
So we all know, because I say it every couple of episodes, that I make a continuing effort to never sound woo-woo. And sometimes it's hard not to sound woo-woo. When you're interested in a lot of things, psychology and cutting-edge science and astrophysics and things that still haven't been quite figured out yet, some of this stuff just sounds weird. And when people are grappling around trying to find the truth, of course, sometimes people are just plain wrong and we haven't figured stuff out yet. And we're toying with these ideas that turn out to be, well, not completely accurate. And I think where woo-woo starts is when people start believing things because they sound like nice ideas and they don't have enough evidence. Anyway, I'm getting way off track, but this is it's something that sounds woo-woo on the face of it, but it turns out to be true. And it also sounds like it's a little bit related to the idea of the placebo effect, but in this case not. So what am I getting at? This is an article that says, believing you can get smarter actually makes you smarter. Now, what does that mean? Is that just self-fulfilling prophecy? Sort of. But check out this study. So there have been a lot of studies into education and some of the different results the different groups get. Things like girls being told that they're not as good at math as boys, and so that becomes self-fulfilling. They tend to not do as well because they heard that once, that girls aren't good at math. There's also similar problems with racial and ethnic groups, kids being unfortunately conditioned to believe that they're not going to perform as well academically, and then they don't perform as well academically. And this is called the stereotype threat. It's essentially people hearing a stereotype that applies negatively toward a group that they consider themselves to be a part of, and their own performance is inhibited as a result of that. But social psychologists have developed a possible antidote to the stereotype threat, which is apparently as simple as telling kids, hey, this is kind of a paper tiger. This is not something you really need to be worried about. You have the same ability as anybody else to scholastically perform and to excel at things, and here's the science behind it, and here's examples of people who have done so in the past. And simply giving a short intervention of this sort has been enough to really change the outcomes for students that have been given this form of a psychological antidote. In this study, they taught African American and European American college students to think of intelligence as changeable rather than fixed. And then another control group of mixed races did not receive this message. The students who learned about IQ's malleability improved their grades more than students who did not receive this message. And interestingly, the black students benefited more from the learning than the white students did, presumably because they had earlier bought into the stereotype threat, and therefore the springback effect from this learning was more powerful than it would have been for the white students. So there it is, a nice power of positive thinking study that doesn't have any smacking of woo-woo about it. All of our brains are highly malleable, they get better with extra use, and each of us to a very large degree has our own neurology increasingly under our own control. Not entirely yet, probably never get there entirely, but we're certainly making strides. Happy to report that we picked up a 5-star review for the podcast on iTunes this week from listener Powadid, who said this is a great resource to learn about nootropics with interviews from industry experts ranging from professors to medical doctors. Thank you. And thanks also to those of you. I got several emails this week with different recommendations for guest experts on an increasingly bizarre and interesting variety of topics. We're going to be having our first fungal episode soon. I think we're going to be learning about something called lion's mane mushroom in an episode in the not distant future. And it is Wednesday the 17th as I record this. Tomorrow is the first day of the Quantified Self Conference in San Francisco. I'm up here in the Bay Area now, and I'm pretty stoked about that because I know that there's going to be several interesting interviews that fall out of this one. So on next Friday's episode, I'll let you know what we've got up our collective sleeves as far as more stuff coming down the pike in future episodes throughout the summer. By the way, thank you for everybody that signed up for the mailing list last week after I let you know about our new little digital sign-up thing where you can text SDS to the phone number 33733. We heard back from several people that are like, yeah, I listen while I'm driving, I listen while I'm not at my computer, this makes it a lot easier, and A, I'm really happy that that makes it easier for people, and B, I feel a little bit mortified that we didn't think of that sooner, but still working to tune up our operations around here, but glad that that one was helpful for people. So again, that is 33733, text SDS for Smart Drug Smarts, and that'll get you on our mailing list where you'll hear, among other things, how a haircut recently improved my health. True story. But now let's jump into our main interview.
Smart Drug Smarts.
I don't know if I've ever come out and said this before, but this is definitely true that I'm probably pretty intimidated by at least a good 30, 40, 50% of the guests we have on this show based on their level of expertise, professional credentials, and the kind of stuff that they've done. And that is certainly true of Dr. Kirk Parsley. For very good reason in his case, because he's an expert on something that I'm very clearly doing wrong and not following his directions, and he is entirely capable of beating the crap out of me. Dr. Parsley served as an undersea medical officer. Undersea medical officer? Who even knew that that was a thing? He's a former Navy SEAL. He has been a member of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine since 2006, and he served as the Naval Special Warfare's expert on sleep medicine. He's lectured extensively about sleep and how we all need more of it. Every time I've heard him talk, he's talked on TED Talks and things like that. I've always felt like he's talking to me because I'm ashamed to say this, but I do not follow his instructions. But that is exactly why I wanted to have him on this show. Maybe so this could be like a scared straight episode for me and I can redouble my efforts to clean up my own sometimes atrocious sleep habits. So with no further preamble, let's jump in with Dr. Kirk Parsley.
I actually didn't have any sort of innate or even latent desire to study sleep. I built my medical training around becoming an orthopedic surgeon or sports medicine, just kind of focused on those areas. And, I was a former SEAL and I went to the military's medical school, which required me to go sort of be equivalent to a general practitioner with a little bit of specialized knowledge about the community. Of course, I had specialized knowledge having been part of the community, but you also go through this residency in hyperbaric medicine where you're trained to treat diving injuries and those types of things. But anyways, so I get back to the SEAL teams and I'm there at an opportune time. They just initiated this huge budget for something they were calling the Tactical Athlete Program, which was really the first time we'd ever approached Navy SEALs as they were professional athletes and got smart about nutrition and exercise periodization and training schedules and all these other things. The SEALs were coming to talk to me about these health concerns that they had. They trusted me because of my background as being one of them, but they came to talk to me about what really sounded like metabolic syndrome.
And metabolic syndrome, just for people that aren't hip to that, that's basically a pre-diabetic condition.
Yeah, exactly. So these guys would have really high inflammatory cascades and really low insulin sensitivity, high fasting insulin. They would also have a decrease in anabolic hormones, including thyroid, very frequently. And it just didn't make sense, because if you look at their phenotypic expression, they're still, at least visually, you would say, well, that guy's in great shape. When you start digging into their metabolic markers, you're like, wow, this looks like a 65-year-old pre-diabetic man. And to be honest, I didn't have a clue how to help them. I was completely dumbfounded. A lot of people are under the misconceptions that physicians actually learn something about nutrition or health or exercise or anything like that in medical school, and we don't. We learn about disease and how to identify disease and treat disease. We know very little about optimizing health, and these guys didn't have disease, but they weren't performing up to where they should or where they were used to, where one would expect them to, given their dedication to the job and all that. And after listening to dozens and then hundreds of these guys tell me very similar stories, the one thing that really stood out to me was that the vast majority of them, probably like 95% of them, were using sleep aids on a very regular basis, and primarily Z drugs, but also using alcohol as a sleep aid, and some of them would use Benadryl and other things, and they all seemed to have deficits in sleep. And again, when I went to the medical literature, it wasn't all that helpful because it was obstructive sleep apnea, central sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, like all these sleep diagnostic diseases, of which there's like 82 or 81 or something. And a lot of times these guys didn't have anything that diagnostic. But even if they did, it wasn't really helpful because the treatment was just like progressively more and more sedating drugs, all of which were disqualifying for the SEALs. And so I just kind of started at the beginning, went through very basic physiology and very basic biochemistry and what's supposed to go on when we sleep and why do we sleep. And being a physician for the SEALs, I could pick up the phone and call world-renowned experts in just about any field and say, hey, I'm a physician with the SEALs and we're having this problem and it seems like your work could help us. Would you mind allowing me to consult with you or train under you? And just sort of through reverse engineering, I figured that a lot of the problems they were having really seemed to be correlated with an absence of sleep. And once you kind of dig into what sleep does for you, you take sleep away, it kind of becomes this obvious pattern. It's like, all right, well, all of the things you're deficient in are built up while you sleep, and all of the things that you have excesses in are built up while you're awake. So this is kind of an obvious pattern to me. And when, of course, a lot of these metabolic markers that I was tracing and tracking on these guys, a lot of the end markers were hormones. And the military is a very conservative organization. They weren't about to let me talk about hormones. But I could get up in front of the groups and lecture about sleep all I wanted to. So it was kind of started almost as like a sleight of hand, as a way to talk about what I really wanted to talk about was the hormones and how that was affecting their performance and how that was tied to sleep. But it was sort of with the end goal of getting these metabolic markers where they should be to enhance their performance. As I learned more and more about sleep in the subsequent 8 years or so, I've just been continually blown away. Every time I think I've had my last surprise about how important sleep is, I learned something new and I'm just like, holy smokes, this is the world's perfect drug and everybody chooses it as this unnecessary luxury. It's a very unpopular message to tell people to sleep more.
On the one hand, everybody professes to enjoy sleeping and it's not hard work. It's something that is natural to us, and yet nobody has the time for it, and we just always seem to kind of just push it off, and now I'll do that tomorrow, I'll do that next week, I'll do it on the weekend, whatever. There's such a weird polarity as far as how people actually feel about it.
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of it ties back pretty nicely if you're not looking through medical data necessarily, but looking through historical accounts and journaling and things like that. It seems pretty obvious that our lack of respect for sleep is really well tied to industrialization. Once machines became the producer of products, which is essentially the production of wealth, and they needed people to run the machines, and we got rural electrification and all that other stuff. Essentially, time became money. What a lot of people don't realize is just about a little more than 100 years ago, most people were still sleeping twice a night, still doing the dual sleep, where you get the majority of your deep sleep and then you wake up for a couple of hours and then you get the majority of your REM sleep. And we know that there's different things going on as far as how they're improving your body during these different phases. But that meant that people were, depending on the season, people were in bed from anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a night. And then once time became money, it was like, well, if I can consolidate those and get rid of that middle sleep, then I have 2 more hours of productivity than anybody else. And then if I can go to bed a little later and get up a little earlier, have a couple of more hours. And we went from being in bed 10 to 12 hours a day to being in bed at 8 hours at the best. Average American's like 6.3 hours.
What do we know from the historical records about how people spent that period of wakefulness in the middle of the night? I mean, were they lying in bed by candlelight reading or having sex with their wife? What actually happened during that time?
Yeah, kind of all of that. Somebody had mined a bunch of children's bedtime stories and stuff and found that a lot of the stories that we tell kids and a lot of the stuff around childhood books have a lot to do with sleep. There's Snow White falling into her sleep and there's Rumpelstiltskin and all these things. And it was a really big storytelling time when people woke up, which is probably why there's a lot of stories that include sleep, the concept of sleep in there. We've actually seen this in cultures that exist today that don't have electricity. They'll go to each other's house and have a chat and talk about stuff, or, they'll just have sex with their wife. The interesting thing is that kids, adolescents especially, don't tend to wake in the middle of the night. So it's kind of a free time for the parents to be together. It was storytelling, it was reading, it was being with your spouse, it was being with your friends, and just basically a couple of hours of time in the dark where you were awake and you went back and finished it off until the sun came out.
Since sleep is your thing, I'm sure have maximized your own sleep rituals in your life. Do you do a daily nap? Are you trying to do this biphasic nighttime sleep? What are you doing for yourself?
What I always preach to my clients is there's ideal and there's reality. The ideal would be to do this dual sleep, biphasic sleep thing at night, but I'm as busy as anybody else, and so that's not a reality for me. But I sleep about 8 to 9 hours a night, and I usually usually have a nap anywhere from 30 minutes to sometimes up to 90 minutes, especially if I've traveled or if I've had a little shorter sleep than usual. But I try to take a nap just about every day. There's really good evidence to support the utility of that.
I think probably myself and a lot of people have found that if you nap over a certain period of time, for me, it seems to be 25 minutes or so is sort of the magic number. If I go beyond that, then I wake up feeling really groggy because I guess I've transitioned into a deeper sleep phase.
That's something that you really have to experiment with on your own as far as to sort of what the ideal waking time is for you when you do these naps. I'll recommend a book to your audience. It's written by Sarah Mendick. She's a UCSD professor, and she wrote a book called Take a Nap, where she actually has this clever little wheel diagram on the cover of the book where you can calculate, okay, I went to sleep, I woke up at this time and I want to take a nap that's going to improve my, let's say, creativity. Then the ideal time for me to nap today would be this time for this duration. What we know about naps is that if you take a nap, it needs to be from about 20 minutes to 120 minutes. That's the definition of nap. Once you get into 121 minutes, we call that sleep. When people talk about naps interfering with nocturnal sleep, that's only true if you go past that 2-hour mark. But it's also true if that nap happens within 3 hours of your nocturnal bedtime. If you're chronically sleep deprived, you're going to go into slow wave sleep or deep sleep much more quickly than if you're not chronically sleep deprived, because you're going to have higher levels of adenosine. And adenosine essentially pushes slow wave sleep, and we call that sleep pressure. So that drive to make you feel like you need to sleep and that drive to push you down into deep sleep comes from essentially being awake. As ATP is used and as a fuel, the byproduct of that is adenosine, and as adenosine builds up in your brain, you feel more and more tired, and your performance degrades. And then probably a lot of your audience knows that caffeine essentially blocks the effects of adenosine.
Quick question though, because your body's still doing all its metabolic processes to a lesser extent while you're asleep too, and is still using ATP, but is somehow the adenosine getting shucked off in some other direction during sleep?
What happens is that I'll call it sort of the flushing mechanism, I guess is the best way to describe it. So like the lymphatic circulation of your brain to get rid of neurotoxins or things that are impairing your activity, those channels open up at night, and you actually clear neurotoxins about 30 to 40% faster than you do during the day. Of course, you're not building up as much ATP either in your brain or your body because your body's obviously not as active, your heart rate's slower, your blood glucose levels are lower, all that type of stuff is going on. By and large, the brain is really sort of slowed down, at least its focal neuronal patterns, things that we would project and predict. Those have slowed down and things are much more random. The firing potential for your resting membrane potential is much lower, so it takes a lot more energy to sort of cause neurons to fire. So sort of just by GABA being prevalent and everything kind of slowing down, you are producing less neurological ATP, but you're also using less ATP. If you're sleep deprived, this doesn't necessarily apply exactly to you. Basically, what we know is that your creativity can be restored with a relatively short nap. Your cognitive functioning, your executive functioning, that needs a slightly longer nap. And then if you want to completely restore your body, primarily I think about this for athletes and people who are going to maybe do 2 training sessions a day in order to get your body somewhat restored and ready to train again. The naps are in that longer region of like 90 minutes to 120 minutes.
There are some people that really prefer doing creative work late at night when they've already been awake 15, 16 hours. Their creativity kind of comes online at that point, or maybe their internal critic has already gone to sleep, but the creative part of their brain, it has a couple hours of juice in it.
I think you're spot on with that. I don't know that there's any research that's actually fleshed that out exactly, but my intuition is that you're probably right on. We know that the longer you're awake, you're having to override your body's normal clock, your biological clock. You're having to override that through sort of stimulating areas of your brain. And what we know is that when people are more tired, they're more impulsive. Everybody's probably been tired enough to where they actually felt drunk. What's really going on there is very similar things to what goes on when you're drunk. You've sort of shut down that prefrontal cortex. And while the prefrontal cortex is great for willpower task and decision-making and organization and declarative memory and all that other stuff, as you say, it's our primary internal critic as well. If you look at a drunk person or a super sleep-deprived person, and all you have to do is go to the hospital and follow around a resident who's post-call, who's been up for 36 hours or 40 hours, and they're just kind of goofy and a little more playful and just a little more spontaneous and just much more likely to say something inappropriate or, consider their actions less, just like somebody who's mildly intoxicated. And I think that's what's happening with creativity and writing, is that you've shut off the filter a little bit. The prefrontal cortex really is the filter of your behavior.
Let's talk about food for a little bit and how digestion and foods and things like that can affect sleep.
So one of the things that we know interferes with sleep is any type of inflammation. You can think of it this way, is that anything that's in your body that's recognized as sort of not me, it requires a response from your body. And your body is either going to investigate it or fight it or sequester it or whatever it's going to do, but it's energy expensive and it causes a ramping up of certain processes. And one of those processes is adrenal stress hormones, because essentially your adrenal stress hormones are the immune system for what's going on outside of your body. So it's really sort of a reaction to anything toxic. And that, of course, impacts your ability to sleep, and then impacting your ability to sleep means you don't get as much deep sleep, and deep sleep is where your body's repairing. So now, not only are you chronically inflamed from eating things that your body wasn't designed to eat, but you're now depriving yourself of the very mechanism that would repair that, which is deep sleep. By and large, when you get nutrition in order, sleep's going to get better. Counterintuitive, or I guess non-intuitive to a lot of people, is that getting sleep in order actually improves nutrition as well. The components through which nutrition is helping with sleep is multifactorial. One is just getting enough nutrition into your body and not being sort of deficient in the whatever, it's a trace element or vitamin or prohormone or essential oil or essential fat or essential amino acids or whatever it is, making sure that nutritionally there's enough density there for your body to be able to do its ordinary things. Then there's the inflammatory component we talked about, which by and large, to get rid of inflammatory things in your diet, it primarily means getting rid of processed things in your diet. The third part of that is that when you eat nutritionally dense, balanced meals and you get rid of processed foods, you improve your insulin sensitivity. And improving your insulin sensitivity, you improve your sleep. Insulin is really the master hormone. It controls the production, proliferation, and sensitivity of just about every other hormone in your body, including a lot of things that are really important for when you sleep, as well as just sort of balancing the blood glucose of the brain. But we know that with a drastic enough change in your blood glucose level, your brain will essentially wake you up. And this is sort of the same thing that's going on during the day. When you have a blood glucose crash, your body wants you to get up and go get some more blood glucose. When you're asleep and you've eaten pasta and donuts and brownies and cookies and chocolate milkshakes all day, and you go to sleep and your blood glucose starts crashing down, that essentially wakes you up. And whether it wakes you up enough to get you out of bed or it just wakes you enough to keep you out of the normal sleep cycles is sort of irrelevant. It's all sort of the same end story.
As far as macronutrient ratios of fats versus carbs versus proteins, any sleep hacks there? Most people feel like when they eat a super carb heavy meal, that can tend to make them sleepy. Any other effects people should be aware of?
If there's any way through nutrition to optimize brain function, I'm absolutely convinced it's ketogenic diet or ketogenic physiology. Primarily, your brain uses glucose as its fuel source. Once you get into ketogenesis, you can actually produce these ketone bodies that your brain can use as a fuel source instead of blood glucose. And that leads to a much smoother energy level throughout your brain, much smoother energy planes. The more sugary processed food you eat, more your blood glucose goes up and down, up and down. The total number doesn't matter nearly as much as the direction of travel.
Right now, I'm about 40 days into a ketogenic diet experiment. I wasn't going to bring it up at all. It was really interesting that you did bring that up.
Yeah, I've been ketogenic for about 18 months. And I did it out of pure necessity, really, as you can imagine, with several business ventures as well as clinical consulting and traveling to lecture and all that stuff. It's a pretty hectic lifestyle. And for a lot of my life, I made my living with my body, but for sort of the second half of it here, I've been making my living with my brain. And so I exercise to maintain fitness, but I don't have any physical goals. Everything for me is cognitive right now. So you give up some of your physical performance to be ketogenic, not so much in endurance, but in power and speed, which is where I prefer to exercise. But the payoff is huge for me. I mean, I literally do not notice any difference at any time of day for my cognitive functioning. It's just completely steady. I always feel exactly the same. And it's not until I've been off of that, like gone on vacation and just decided, whatever, I'm going to have some corn chips and street tacos and all this other stuff and kind of get out of ketogenesis. And over the course of that week, I just remember, oh yeah, this up and down, I felt like this all the time before. And I just don't have any ups and downs. It's like I wake up as soon as I'm really awake, which I'm kind of a slow waker, but it's on and it's just flat all day until I go to sleep. And I could literally perform right before I go to sleep as well as I could an hour after I woke up.
If I want to get my 8.5 hours of sleep or whatever it is per night and try to get myself back to what my optimal performance would be based on having enough sleep, how many weeks before I sort of pay off my sleep debt and get to that optimal point again?
Sleep has a fairly robust clinical data repository, and that's because, of course, sleep is relatively benign, and it's pretty easy to get IRB approval to test people's sleep. In these sleep studies, and I think William Dement was probably the first guy to do this, he converted an old bunker into basically sleep environments. This is just essentially military barracks where they put just like a military-style bed in a room with a toilet, and that's it, and it's completely dark, and it's cool in there. And they put people in there for 14 hours a day. And then they let them out for 10 hours a day. And then they would bring them back in for 14 hours a day. And so they're in complete darkness 14 hours out of every day. And the average person sleeps about 12 and a half hours when they first start this trial. And over the course of about 3 to 4 weeks, that titrates down to about 7.5 hours on average, plus or minus 15 minutes. What really popped out to me is that if people slept 7.5 hours, that means that they were laying on a bed in a dark room in a cool environment with no stimulation, no sound for 6.5 hours a day and staying completely awake. So unless you could do that, you're probably not completely sleep adapted, is what we call that. These people we know have paid back their sleep debt. Now again, like I said earlier, there's a difference between ideal and reality. Not everybody can do something like that, do something that intensive. So the answer we don't know is if you catch up an hour a night, say, or you catch up 2 hours on Friday night and 2 hours on Saturday night, and the rest of the week is kind of, say you're not going into deficit, but you're traveling at necessity. How long does it take to catch back up? And how long can you actually hold a sleep debt? I mean, if you've never actively paid it back, do you still have a sleep debt from college? Nobody knows the answer to this. If you want to talk about sleep hygiene, I always tell people to just sort of think of it in two components. When we talk about sleep hygiene, what we're saying is that we're trying to put ourselves in the right environment to be asleep at night. So there's two things that interfere with that. One is light saturation, how much light's going into your eyes and at what time of the day are you stopping that light. And then the other one is simply stimulation. So anybody who's ever been really tired at work or at school and like, as soon as my day's over, I'm going home and I'm going to sleep, and then you get talked into going to happy hour, you have a couple of depressants, you have a couple of glasses of alcohol, and then all of a sudden you feel wide awake and you're ready to go. And the reason you feel wide awake is because you've used stimulation to overcome your brain's neurochemistry that was sort of making you sleepy. So if you just keep those two components in mind and you say, we evolved to reuse the light to set our biological clock and our circadian rhythm and adjust our rhythm every day. The way it works ancestrally is the sun goes down, light decreases in our eyes. That causes some pathways to get fired in our brain. Eventually we start producing melatonin, we start releasing GABA, our brain starts slowing down, we start suppressing adrenal function and stress hormones. And then a few hours after the sun goes down, we feel really sleepy and we go to sleep. And then that circadian rhythm carries out its path throughout the night, and we start waking up, right around the time the sun starts coming up. And then, of course, the sun comes up and reinforces that. More light reinforces that waking. So getting rid of light saturation for sleep hygiene is really important. So not only does that mean having a dark bedroom, but getting rid of an alarm clock in the bedroom as well. If you're going to have an alarm clock, you put it inside your nightside table drawer so that you can't actually see it. You don't have LED lights on your electronics. Ideally, you don't have electronics in your bedroom whatsoever. So, it should literally be Silence of the Lambs, spooky kind of dark, like you can't see your hand in front of your face. So that's the light component. The other thing is the stimulation. So one of the big problems when I work with executives is they want to work. I talk them into sleeping 8 hours, and so they say, oh, I'm going to go to bed at 10 and get up at 6. And I say, okay, great. But they want to work until 9:55. It doesn't work that way. There's this natural cascade of events that have to happen. This thing is awake, it's alerting you. It's making your brain sort of stress out, and it's increasing stress hormones, it's increasing adrenal function, and it's suppressing the cascade of events that you've encouraged by getting rid of the light in your eyes. So it's kind of counterproductive at that point. So giving yourself at least an hour before you go to bed where you're not trying to cram in new information, you're not doing anything super stimulating, you're not exercising, but it's ideal to sort of do something soothing and relaxing. For some people that's reading, and I say, okay, fine, just kind of keep the light level as low as possible. And some people it's doing sort of banal or superficial things on the internet.
Looking at pictures of cats.
Yeah, exactly. They're looking at pictures of cats to calm themselves down. Okay, that's fine. But ideally, it's get rid of electronics, decrease the stress, decrease interactions with other people, decrease communication, and just, let your body get ready to go to sleep. Go to a dark room that's quiet, that's electronic free, and that's cool. It's really hard to sleep when it's warm outside, and unfortunately the ideal sleep temperature in clinical research has bore out to be 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which pretty much means most people have to run their air conditioning year round to be able to reach that temperature, which can be prohibitively expensive. But the coolest environment you can kind of get to, not going below that. And it's really that simple. I mean, it's just those things. And there's 100 practical applications for how to do that, but that's the big concept right there.
If somebody was going to optimize one way or the other, optimize the sleep hygiene or optimize their sleep amount, do you feel like one is a bigger win than the other for your average sleep-deprived person with crappy sleep hygiene?
If you have crappy sleep hygiene and it's taking you longer to get into slow-wave sleep and it's taking you longer to cycle into REM, and the actual quality of your sleep is less than if you had great sleep hygiene and got 6 hours of sleep. Where is that happy medium? I don't really think there's an either or, but I would probably hedge over quality of sleep. And that's in fact what I worked with the SEALs. And it's what I end up talking a lot about with law enforcement and first responders and DOD in general. A lot of people just don't have control over their sleep, right? A lot of people work night shift, or when I worked with the SEALs, of course, they fight their war at night. They sleep during the day. And that's not ideal. And they're crossing multiple time zones, and they're not working every night. Some nights they're sleeping, some nights they're staying awake all night. It gets really hard. With the SEALs, what I did was I focused on sleep quality. And I did that through education. The sleep supplement that I've just released is really what I designed with the SEALs. And all it was that when I was talking earlier about that melatonin production pathway, I just basically made sure that all of the nutrients were there, because I found a lot of things in that pathway to be deficient in the SEALs. So they were going out and buying this supplement from this store and this one from that one, and this one's a powder and this is a pill and this is a capsule and this is a liquid, and finally simplified that down to a single version, which is what I've been doing for like the last year of my life. The point of all that is that these guys were still living very chaotic sleep cycle lives, but in order to improve their performance and all these things they were complaining about, I focused on improving the quality of their sleep and encouraged them to increase the quantity, but a lot of times they couldn't. And they still did remarkably better. I would focus on quality over quantity if you're going to choose between the two. Have ideal sleep hygiene and get like really good, deep, solid sleep. And what I say often is create a sleep ritual that you stick to every night. And by ritualizing it, you can get the quality to just continue to improve piecemeal. And when you can get in some extra quantity, do that. But I would hedge on the quality side.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So thank you so very much to Dr. Parsley for taking the time to chat with me about my own cognitive Achilles heel. I actually did take a brief nap before recording the segments that you're now listening to for this episode, so his advice has not fallen on completely deaf ears, and I am working to atone for my wakeful sins. For those of you who want to know more about Dr. Parsley and what he's doing, he has a personal website at docparsley.com. That's DOCPARSLEY. And he's also recently put out a sleep aid supplement at sleepcocktails.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at Doc Parsley. So those of you who have been listening for a while remember when we did the water fast week early in this year. It was February. And we've gotten some requests from listeners to do something similar again. You know, I've been talking about how I've been doing a ketogenic diet for a while now, which I'm coming up on the end of my 60-day ketogenic experiment. Some listeners have asked about maybe doing a group ketosis thing. I'm not super sure about that. I feel like that one might be a little bit medically irresponsible of me to try to round up a group of people for, strangely, even more so than the fasting. But it did occur to me, actually, doing this episode, it might be fun to get a group of people together and have a massive sleep catch-up group online. Each of us try to pay back our sleep debts. Everybody commit to sleeping 10 hours a night for 2 weeks straight and kind of see what results from that. If people are interested in that, definitely drop me an email, jesse@smartdrugsmarts.com, or go to the website, ping through any of the usual channels. That might be kind of a fun, counterintuitive online thing to do together. But now, as promised, the Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts. Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick.
Okay, so maybe you suspected this, but I'm going to keep on the sleep theme with this Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick. So as I said, it turns out that loud noises can increase your risk of obesity. How could that be true? Well, it's true if those loud noises occur while you sleep. Researchers have found that noise pollution from traffic and people that live near airports and things like that, where they have loud noises throughout the night, sirens, building construction nearby, things like that, where sleep can be continually interrupted, even at a level that doesn't necessarily wake a person up consciously, can lead to weight gain and bad effects on a person's overall physical health. Research published recently in the British Medical Journal showed that those who live under a flight path or near an airport were under particular danger. Railway noises also pose a problem, and of course road traffic is the dominating source simply because more people are near roads than are near airports. Said the lead author of the study, Andrew Pico, health effects related to traffic noise are widespread and span from annoyance, sleep disturbances, and changes in stress hormone levels, all the way to adverse effects on the cardiovascular system. Sleep disturbances may affect immune functions, influence the central control of appetite and energy expenditure, and increase circulating levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Last but not least, in tying back to weight, he said that short sleep duration can lead to increased appetite and reduced energy expenditure. Get a bad night's sleep, you're too tired to exercise the next day, you're too tired to move to an apartment that is not near the airport, and the vicious circle continues.
Smart Drug Smarts. The podcast so smart, we have smart in our title. Twice.
Okay, that is the entire episode number 81. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hanging around until the end. If you liked what you heard, take a nap. And when you wake up from that nap, grab a couple of friends and tell them about Smart Drug Smarts. Tweet about us, Facebook about us, find passed out people and write Smart Drug Smarts backwards on their forehead. Anything that you want to do to spread the word we are in favor of. I will be back at you next week, same time, same podcast, and with the same unflagging commitment to helping you fine-tune the performance of your very own brain. Have a great week, and as usual, stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smarts podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smarts should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.